Today we start the chapter on coordination. This is a part of the A2 biology syllabus, and the syllabus code is 9700. This is chapter 4. Sort of according to the syllabus is the fourth chapter, because if you know, in A2 there are 8 chapters, and this is the fourth chapter, which is control and coordination, or just coordination. And these are the 8 chapters that you need to study for the A2 level, and we're going to study this now in a little more detail. First thing that you need to understand is the comparison that we do between nervous coordination and the other is the endocrine system. Now, if you look at a previous video in the homeostasis, endocrine are the ductless glands, and these glands are the ones which produce hormones, and these hormones are carried in the blood. So basically what we have to understand is how this coordination occurs by both these factors. Number one, the nervous coordination, which is the nervous system, and that is going to be carried out by nerves. We're going to do a little more about nerves. Please come back to this after we finish this chapter, all the videos on this chapter. So the features that we have here is nervous system and endocrine system. Now this is of course one of the questions given in the books, which is the prescribed book for Cambridge. So method of communication is how do they communicate? What travels in these nerves? Is it electricity? No, it's not electricity. It's electrical impulses. So electrical impulses travel. Please do not say messages. It's not an SMS. It's not a WhatsApp message. It's electrical impulses. And these are the words that we want you to write in the exams, because that's very typically a very correct biological English. So electrical impulses, so method of communication is electrical impulses, while here we have hormones. Hormones are the ones which are produced by the endocrine glands. So we have the endocrine system and we have the nervous system. So pathway, these are neurons or nerves which are going to study. This of course is in the blood plasma. You know the blood is made up of plasma and it's got cells. So it's going to be carried all around the body. Speed of communication is very fast because nerve impulses are 100 meters per second. So it's very, very fast. Well, this is slow because blood, yes, circulates fast. You might say, yes, blood is also fast, but it's slower than this. So in the comparative, then we say it's fast and slow. Duration of effects like short, like your muscles contract, but then you stretch your arm, then you bend your arm, and then again it goes back to its original this thing. So it's a duration effect is short. While these are long, minutes or hours or days, like for instance, like endocrine system growth hormone. So you grow tall, but then you don't grow, you grow tall for life. So it has long-term effects. And sometimes, of course, some hormones work for minutes, some work for a few hours, some work for days. Then the response, the nervous system usually goes to muscles and to glands. So response is by either muscle contraction or the release of a secretion. Like for instance, you smell something very interesting, like a barbecue taking place nearby, and you salivate, or your salivary glands start to produce saliva. So glands. Now in the nervous system, what you have, muscles are contracting or the glands will release the secretion. In endocrine system, there are many responses, such as glucose can be converted to glycogen, or protein synthesis can occur, more pepsin will be made in your stomach, or there's increase in the rate of respiration when you are exercising on the treadmill. Now, the last point is the target area. In the nervous system, the target area is very localized. I'm writing with my pen, so only my arm is moving. While in the target area and the endocrine could be a whole tissue or could be organs. Like for instance, when a person grows because of the effect of the growth hormone, he grows as a human being, he grows tall. His bones grow, his muscles grow, his nerves grow. So whole tissues or organs, some hormones affect the whole body. So what you have to understand is that the comparison between the nervous coordination and the endocrine coordination. Once we finish this chapter, please come back to this table and then go through it once again. The most important point that we need to first understand is that the nervous system is divided into two portions. One is called the central nervous system. And as you can see, the orange shading, it is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. So you can see how it is colored in orange, the brain and the spinal cord. It mostly contains all the relay neurons. While the peripheral nervous system, now this is of course called the PNS, we also call this the PNS and we call this the CNS. So composed of the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are the one which are all in the brain, like the optic nerve, which goes from the eyes to the brain here. And then it's also made of the spinal nerves, which are coming out of the spinal cord, all these. And the peripheral nerves, which are found here in your arms and your legs. And these contain both the sensory neurons and the motor neurons. So please understand central nervous system, which is made of the brain and the spinal cord. That's it. And the periphery means on the outside, like we say, Shai the freebie caught a catch at the periphery. So peripheral nervous system. And this is made up of all the, you see, because you have to remember is like we have a lot of sensory, like eyes, which are in the skull. So the eyes will only carry the impulses to the brain. I mean, it's not going to, from the eyes, it's not going to travel to the spinal cord, or from your nose when you smell something, or from your tongue when you taste something. All that information is going to go to the brain. So that is the cranial nerves which are going to be involved in that. Spinal nerves are involved because if you touch something hot, so there's going to be an impulse traveling all the way up your arm to the spinal cord, and then the information is going to go to the brain. Similarly, something in your leg, if you touch something in your leg, all that is going to come here, enter the spinal cord, then it's going to go, and your brain is going to be informed, and you say, oh my God, there is a pin pricking in my shoe, or there's something hurting me. So please understand the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is just the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is all that which is shaded in yellow. So, I mean, I just rub all this off for you all to understand. So the yellow is all the peripheral nervous system. The orange is all the central nervous system. A neuron. A neuron is a cell, and many neurons make a nerve. So the cell, a neuron, is a sort of a weird type of a cell because it's not a very normal cell which we draw. It's a cell with a cell membrane. So this is the cell membrane which I have drawn. And inside you have the cytoplasm. And here you would have the nucleus. So it's a normal cell, but one of the funny part of it is that one of its part is there is a big cytoplasmic extension. And this can be pretty long, this cytoplasmic extension. Now, what we have to understand is the direction of an impulse. As I told you earlier, we talk of an electrical impulse. We talk of an electrical impulse. So if the impulses are coming to the cell body, now which part is the cell body? The cell body is the part which contains the nucleus. And this is the nucleus. So the cell body is the part of the neuron which contains the nucleus. Now those cytoplasmic extensions which are bringing impulses to the cell body, these ones are called dendrites. Please remember, as it's mentioned in your book, the word dendron has been removed, now it's no longer used. And that which is carrying impulses away, that which is carrying impulses away is called the axon. So this part is the axon. So we have to understand number one, dendrites, those which are carrying impulses to the cell body, and a axon A away, which is away from the cell body. Please, the cell body is the focal point. So that which is carrying it away is called the axon. Now the axon can be covered with myelin sheath. It's covered by myelin sheath. Now, it could be a myelinated axon or it could be a non-myelinated axon. So it can be both. But there are areas, now this myelin sheath, we're going to go in a little more details about this. This myelin sheath actually is a Schwann cell which is wrapped around it. And there are areas where there is no myelin sheath, this area. And that is called the node of Ranvier. So node of Ranvier where there is no myelin sheath. So this would be the node of Ranvier, this would be the node of Ranvier. So we have these nodes of Ranvier here, of course, would also be the node of Ranvier here, here, there'll be the nodes of Ranvier. And these are then called myelinated axons. Myelinated axons. But there are, of course, a large number of non-myelinated axons as well. Now, I want you to be looking at the three different types of neuron that we are going to study. Number one, we're going to study a motor neuron, an M motor, M muscle. So either they go to a muscle or they go to a gland. So motor neurons end in muscles or glands. Renal neurons are in between two neurons, between the sensory and the motor, and these are called relay neurons, just like a relay race. Sensory neurons are those which are carrying impulses from the sense organs to the central nervous system. As we do the reflex arc, you need to come back to this page and then have a look at this again. Now you can see all these, look at all the labels, dendrites, dendrites, dendrites. These are all carrying impulses towards the cell body. And then you have the cell body. Now you see the cell body in the motor neuron is at one end here. The cell body in the relay neuron is sort of in the center. And again, the cell body in the sensory neuron is somewhere midway. It's not at the one end. And then you can see this is called, as the impulses are going, this is called the peripheral axon. And then after the cell body is called the central axon. So this is the one which is a little different, that there is a peripheral and a central axon in the sensory neuron. Please understand this. But here in the relay neuron, this is the axon. In the motor neuron, this is the axon. So all previously we used to label this dendron, but that now has been discontinued. So please do not label this dendron anymore. That would be a mistake. So peripheral axon, and so all those which are, this is now defies the rule which I said away from the cell body. So here is the only one which is different, as I said in this. Here, of course, this is away. This is also away from the cell body. But this is called as peripheral axon, and this is called the central axon, which of course is going to carry impulses to the spinal cord. And we talk a little more about it when we talk about the reflex action. This is a review of the reflex arc, and the important things which I want you to understand here is number one, the sensory neuron, which is colored in red, the relay neuron, which is here in gray, and the motor neuron, which is in black. So this is the motor neuron, M motor. This red is the sensory neuron, which is carrying impulses to the spinal cord. And this is the relay neuron, which joins the sensory and the motor. So number one, we talk of the arrival of the stimulus and activation of receptor. Number two, we take activation of the sensory neuron. Then step three is information processing in the CNS. Then step four, activation of the motor neuron. And then step five is the response to the effector. So you touch something hot and you withdraw your hand. Now that is all what is a reflex action. It is an automatic response to a stimulus. And these are usually very protective because they protect your body from damage. So it's basically for protection. Like you touch something hot, you withdraw your hand. Otherwise you'd burn yourself. So reflex action, sensory neuron, and you can see the cell body of the sensory neuron is in the dorsal root ganglion. So this is the dorsal root which is coming here, and this is the ventral root which is coming out. As you can see here, this is a much better picture, the colored one of the sensory neuron. So here you have the receptor in the skin, and this is the sensory neuron which is carrying impulses. Now you see this lump here, sort of a speed breaker here. Now this is called the dorsal root ganglion, and you have lots and lots of hundreds and hundreds of cell bodies of the sensory neuron here. And this is the dorsal root. You see the spinal cord, there is a dorsal root and there's a ventral root. So the dorsal root is the one which has this lump or the speed breaker, and that's called the dorsal root ganglion. And the sensory neuron is, these are all the receptors in the skin, and then this sensory neuron is going to be all this coming right up to here. So this will be the sensory neuron, and then it synapses with this relay neuron. And you see the relay neuron is inside the spinal cord. And then it synapses, so there'll be a synapse here, there will be a synapse here, and there will be a synapse here. Wherever two neurons meet, there are synapses. And then we have the blue is the motor neuron. So the motor neuron is going to not come out of the dorsal root, but it's going to come out of the ventral root. So the motor neuron comes out of the ventral root, and then they both join, and this area where they both join is called the spinal nerve. Where they're both together is called the spinal nerve. So the dorsal root only has the sensory neuron. So it's very easy to remember it. Dorsal root, sensory neuron. The ventral root has the motor neuron, but then they join together and form the spinal nerve. The motor neuron will go to an effector, and this effector can be a muscle or a gland. Please pause the video here and have a look at this diagram again and just revise all the different parts of the syllabus, especially the fact that the sensory neuron is in the dorsal root ganglion while the motor neuron passes out of the ventral root. Then we do a comparison of the features of the motor neuron and the sensory neuron. The motor and the sensory neuron features are position of the cell body. Now in the motor neuron, it is at one end of the cell, while here it is part way along the axon. The location of the cell body, this is in the gray matter of the central nervous system. And you know the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. While this one is in the dorsal root ganglion, please remember this, or it is near the receptor. Direction of the impulses, you know, motor neurons are going to carry impulses to muscles and glands. So that has to be from the brain and spinal cord, which is the central nervous system, to the effector. And the effector can be either a muscle or a gland. While in the sensory neurons, like you touch something hot, so the receptor cells are in the skin, and they carry the sensory neurons are going to carry the information to the spinal cord, and your brain is going to be informed. And that is how you're going to respond to this touching something hot and withdrawing your hand. Now the function of the motor neuron's function is stimulates muscles to contract. That's how you withdraw your hand. Or it will make some glands to secrete, like adrenaline from the adrenal glands. While the sensory neurons only transmit information about external environment to the central nervous system. That's how you're able to see. That's how you're able to smell. That's how you're able to taste, because you have sensory neurons which carry this information to the brain, and the spinal cord is informed as it depends upon which part of the body is being stimulated. This is another diagram of the reflex arc, and we can just sum it all up. Number one, as you can see, it's very well numbered and you can understand it. Number one is here, receptors detect, generate a nerve impulse. Number two, sensory neurons conduct a nerve impulse to the central nervous system. Number 3, sensory neuron enter the spinal cord through the dorsal root. Number 4, sensory neuron forms a synapse with a relay neuron. Number 5, relay neuron forms a synapse with a motor neuron. Number 6, motor neuron carries impulses to effector. In this example, the biceps contracts to raise the arm away from the flame. So this is a very good recap of the entire reflex action. So I hope this is now makes it all very clear and you are able to understand it and answer all the questions on reflex action. Now coming back to the myelin sheath, which we discussed earlier on, we've got to understand is that this axon, the axon is the area which is the part which is the cytoplasmic extension which is enclosed in the cell membrane. So this is the axon which I'm coloring in blue here now. Now as you can see this is the cell surface membrane of the axon. So I'm just going to color this in blue so that everybody is clear what I'm talking about. So this is the cell membrane of the axon, and inside this would be the cytoplasm of the axon. So this is the cell membrane of the axon which I've colored in blue here. So the blue is the cell membrane of the axon and the cytoplasm of the axon which I've shaded in blue here. But outside this you have some sort of like a paratha roll. The Schwann cell is wrapped around it. So this Schwann cell is a normal cell, but it's wrapped around it. So you can see there is the cytoplasm of the Schwann cell. So this whole thing is the Schwann cell, which I'm coloring in red. And it's like a roll. Well, I like to think of it as a paratha roll with the axon in the middle. So this Schwann cell is a cell, but it's wrapped around the axon. So there is the cytoplasm. Now this, of course, would be the cytoplasm of the Schwann cell. Now look at where that label is. And then the cell membrane of the Schwann cell. So just imagine a big structure, a cell, which has a cell membrane and a cytoplasm, but then it is wrapped around. It's like a big roti or a paratha, and then it's wrapped around the axon. But that roti or that paratha has got a cell membrane, and that cell membrane will be the cell membrane of the Schwann cell. And somewhere, of course, there is a nucleus of the Schwann cell as well. So this entire structure is the Schwann cell which is wrapped around it. And then, of course, the Schwann cell has the cell membrane, has the nucleus of the Schwann cell, and has the cytoplasm of the Schwann cell. So this is something which you need to understand in a transverse section of the axon of a myelinated neuron. Now, before we continue with this chapter, we would first like to study the most important active transport pump which is required in the neurons, and that is called the sodium potassium pump. Now, this sodium potassium pump is number one, it is active transport, that's why it requires ATP. So it has an ATP binding site. And the important thing is what you need to notice is there is an outside of the cell and there's the inside of the cell, and you can see this is the phospholipid bilayer. So these are embedded in the phospholipid bilayer of the neurons, and what they do is they pump out 3 sodium. 3 sodium is pumped out, and 2 potassiums are always pumped in. So 3 sodium out. Now I've made a very simple mnemonic for this, and the mnemonic is Nokia, and it is 3 sodium out, 2 potassium in always. So this is for you to remember, 3 sodium is out, 2 potassium in. Now this is the normal sodium potassium pump. It will always pump out, and this requires active transport. You can see this is a channel protein, but it has its shape changes, and the 3 sodium are pumped out. And as then it changes shape, and then the potassiums get attached, and then they are pumped inside. So you can see these diagrams. This is A, this is B, this is C, and then D, and then E, and then F. So you can see how, I mean, I'm going to just erase all this which I've done on it so that you all can revise it and you can easily have a look at it. So what is happening is that ATP binding site and the 3 sodium are pumped out. This is another diagram of this. So 3 sodium ions are pumped out and 2 potassium are always pumped in. So you see these are the 2 potassium sites here and here. So it has sites for, it has places where the sodium fits, and you can see these diagrams here, the sodium fits in here, and then the three sodium are thrown out of the cell. This is the outside of the cell, and then the potassium are got hold of, and the potassium are then thrown inside, and you can see there is this ATP binding site to this channel protein. So 3 sodium out, 2 potassium in. That is what the sodium potassium pump is going to work at. And this is going to happen. We're going to be talking a lot about this as we start discussing the resting potential and the action potential as we go on further in the chapter. Now, this will finish this video here, and we'll continue with the rest of this chapter in the second video on this chapter. Thank you, and I hope you've understood this portion of the chapter and it becomes more easier for you to do the questions on this chapter. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.